Hello, I'm Fred Hooper, lead visual effects artist at NVIDIA, and this is Introduction to Niagara and Unreal Engine. Niagara is a new tool in Unreal Engine that allows you to create and modify visual effects. Now, this tool set will eventually replace Cascade as the in-game effects tool. In the next few videos, we're going to go over the basic interface to Niagara and then create some simple effect systems. Now, if you want to follow along, load the latest Unreal Engine and create a project with the starter content. This was recorded in Unreal Engine 4.25. But before we get started, we need to be sure to have the Niagara plugin running, as well as go over a handful of terms. So to check to see if your Niagara plugin's running, go up to Edit, Plugins, and then do a search for Niagara. And you'll see that a handful of Niagara plugins come in. For this video, you're just going to need the Niagara plugin enabled. Now, mine's enabled already, so that's good. If these are not enabled, you'll need at least have this enabled. I generally have the Niagara plugin plus the extras because I like seeing the extra stuff. And if you click on it, on any of these, you'll need to restart the editor. So this is all set. So after you get restarted, if you need to, just come on back. Now we need to go over a couple of the key differences between Niagara and Cascade. Now let's open up a P explosion like starter content. So go into starter content, particles, P explosion. Okay, now here's a default explosion. Now in Cascade, the way you'd work this up is that each one of these emitters is a different part of this explosion, and you'd create the effect and then place it in the world and trigger it, say a sequence or a timeline, or you'd take this explosion and let's say you want to use it for a grenade, you'd spawn it in a blueprint. In Cascade, each emitter is unique and this is a fixed particle system. So let's say this explosion is for your grenade or your rocket, and your game calls for different explosions per surface. And the game has, 16 surfaces or something. You need to create each one of these surfaces as a different effect, but you'd need to duplicate all these emitters out. After finishing the set of effects, you get it in game and then go to the team for feedback, and there are changes, which will, of course, happen. Say the gameplay designer thinks the explosion is too big after playtests, or the fireball is blowing out in the game, or there need to be more sparks, stuff like that. You need to go into those versions and then change them by hand. Now that doesn't seem like a big deal, but if you have a lot of surfaces and let's say you have like a small, a medium, and a large version of this explosion with all the different potential surfaces, the work can quickly multiply and this can take a lot of time. Now, in Aggro, the workflow is similar, where you can create emitters and then spawn them in your game as a particle system, but you can instance each one of these emitters. So let's say you need to change, if you build it right, let's say they said, hey, we need to change the fireball on all those effects. If you instance it out right, you could just change a single emitter and then it will populate out to all the other systems. And then this would cut down on a lot of wasted time and work. Now, I'd say the biggest change between Cascade and Niagara is that Niagara is based in HLSL, allowing you more controls in your modules, and if needed, you could even script your own. Before we look at the editor, I want to go over some Niagara terms that we'll be using throughout this set of videos. A system is a completed effect that is used in the game engine. So these are multiple emitters that comprise like the look of your effect. And this is what is spawned in game or is populated out as you need it. Next is your emitter. Emitter is a single stage of a system. It's a single effect component that has the behavior of the effect. Now it's generally a stack that is composed of modules. They are able to be instanced in a system and can also stand alone. Next is your module. Modules are modifiers for emitters, so they do a lot of the same thing they do in Cascade, but they're much more versatile in Aggro because, as I stated, you can make scripts of your own if you needed. And each module have blocks of behaviors that you can modify. In essence, they control the behavior of the emitter. And lastly, we have the parameters. Parameters define what a module does, and it's broken down into, the types of data is broken down into 4 types. Now you can also set up parameters to take information from other parts of Unreal and change them, like in Blueprint, or timelines, or sequences. Parameters in general are very powerful. And the parameters basically define what each module is doing or can do. And those are the 4 terms I wanted to go over before diving into the editor. So let's do that next. Now, when you created a new emitter in Cascade, it would come in with your default stack, which would look something like basically this. Solo this, and it would come in with just a single emitter. Niagara has expanded this quite a bit. You can select different types of emitters and systems based on what you want. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to add in a Niagara system and see all of the options that are available with their wizard. Normally with Cascade, you'd go up to particle system, but it's a little buried in the effects folder here. So go down to effects, Niagara system. And from here, you're going to get this wizard that's going to give you a handful of options. You've got your new system from selected emitters, new system from template, copy some existing systems, or create an empty system. Now, creating an empty system is a bit advanced. It's more for people that know how to use Niagara really well. And you know exactly what you want to do, so I'd pass on that for now. What we're going to do is we're going to create a new system from a template. So hit next. And we've got just a handful of options here: directional burst, a radial burst, and a simple explosion. Now, since we've been using explosion as our example, let's just click on that one and hit finish. And from here, let's name this effects my emitter, or my system 01. For the naming convention, that honestly depends on you and your project and what you have set up. I generally use effects underscore for my systems, and then E underscore for my emitters. As far as what can be used in a level, you cannot use an emitter directly in a level. You can only use systems. If I quickly made an emitter here, if you go to effects, Niagara emitter, and then make a new emitter from a template, let's do an upward mesh burst. Finish. And I'll call this E my emitter. Hold on. Not great naming convention, but it's just for example. So if you try to pull this in here directly, it won't work. It'll block you there. So you can only pull systems into the game state or have them triggered through blueprint or timelines or sequences, things like that. So let's dive into Niagara. So go to Effects, My System 01 and double click, and this is Niagara. So now this is the Niagara interface, and before we get to any sort of building, I want to go over all of the panels and windows and things so that we understand what we're doing before we get started. So let's go up to the menu bar and let's click on File, and you've got your Save As, and now let's click on Open Asset. Now what I like about this is that I can open any asset that I'm using. So let's say I want to get a material. So let's look at base color. And it'll come in as a tab, which is really great. So let's say I wanted to add in particle color, or say maybe I wanted to add in a dynamic parameter. I can tab between the Niagara system and the material and just work as I need it to. So that's really good. Let's close this and don't save. And let's go back up to the file window, the file dropdown, excuse me. And we have your save all. Choose files to save, as well as your connect to source control, which will allow you to connect to whatever kind of source control you need. And I'll say run without source control for now. In the edit dropdown, we have your undo, redo as usual, and then your undo history, which will allow you to step back into your history in case, like, let's say you made a bunch of changes here and then all of a sudden you're like, oh man, I really want to go back to an earlier version of this. This will keep track of a bunch of your changes that you've made to the emitter. And then your preferences, projects, and plugins like any other actor. And go up to the asset dropdown. Find a content browser. Okay, that one's pretty straightforward. So let's pull this off to the side here. And let's say that you're looking for some asset and you're digging through some things, and then you lost your Effects My System. All you'd need to do is go up to Asset, find a content browser, hit Control B, or hit the Browse button, which is right here. Click that, it goes right back to your system. Now next is the reference viewer, size map, and all this stuff. Now you need to save the system as well as save the current level to see information for this. So if you go to Asset, Reference Viewer, you can see we've got a bunch of information here. It's showing that the minimal default is referencing the system, and then the system is referencing all of these modules here. And if it's being referenced in multiple places, it should let you know. It's very useful for when you're trying to find out what's being used where. Next is your size map. This will give you all of your information on your disk and as well as your memory. This has modules, textures, information, the actual system. Next is your audit assets. I haven't really used this much. There's has a bit of information there about that, about your system. And then your shader cook statistics. This is mainly for the level and what's in the level. But it gives you like primitive statistics from like the chair and the floor, static mesh, texture sets, and this will include the textures in your system, your stats, excuse me. And again, stuff for the level and all the actors and things like that. Go to the window drop-down, and what I want to do is talk about this block of settings here. All this is doing is this allows you to bring windows back into Niagara. So let's say you're working on the timeline and you accidentally close it. All you need to do is go up to Windows and hit Timeline. Also, this also allows you to kind of tab between windows, as well as bring in windows that aren't automatically loaded, like your generated code and your attribute spreadsheet. So I'm going to close those. And then everything below that is pretty much in all the other actor windows that are in Unreal. So I'm just going to skip these for now. Go up to the Help drop-down, and there's only a couple things I want to go over in here, mainly reporting a bug. Now, reporting a bug, I'm one of these people that likes to report bugs, so please report bugs if you can. The more bugs that are submitted to Niagara, the better the tool is going to actually be in the long run. So please report bugs when you can. And also you have an issue tracker. Let's say you reported a bug and you're like, hey, what happened? You can do a search for your bug as well as see what's been fixed. And then you've got your Niagara documentation and all of your supports. So if you hit your support, it'll bring you to your Unreal page. And these are basically shortcuts to things like your forum, Answer Hub, and your wiki. So these are just links to Epic sites so you don't have to dig through Google or whatever browser you might be using. And then after that, you can go to Unreal Engine, and then lastly, they've got this credits. This is everyone who's worked on Unreal, which is kind of cool. It's good to know who worked on what. And then your About Unreal editor, which will bring you the version of Unreal that you're in. And that's all I wanted to go over with the menu bar. Now we're going to take a look at the toolbar. Now the toolbar has some common buttons in it. A couple of them from the menu bar, like the File, the Save, as well as the Browse. But then you also have your compile. Now the way that the compile works is every time you make a change here, the way that it's set up right now, it'll automatically compile when your graph changes. So let's say we go to particle update, and we add a module, and we do a search for noise. We put in a curl noise force. You can see that if you fix the issue, it'll be dirty for a second and then compile. Now let's delete this and then go to turn off the automatically compile when your graph changes. Go back to particle update, do curl noise, fix it over here in the selection window, and you can see that the compile stays dirty until you hit it. So I generally keep this turned on at all times. Next button is your thumbnail button. This is just like the thumbnail button in Cascade, so Let's just pull this off to the side here. Click on the preview window and hit your space bar to refresh your system. And when you get something that you kind of like, hit thumbnail and it will update here. Next is your bounds button. This basically is set up so that it'll show you when the game is going to draw your particle system. So it draws everything inside of these bounds. Now right now this is set up as an automatic bound. See, it's growing there. If you have a GPU system, you're going to need to set this as a fixed bound, which we'll go over a bit later. Then in your simulation button, you've got a handful of options here for autoplay, reset on change, and resimulate when paused. And that's pretty much all that's in the toolbar right now. And I'm sure there's going to be more buttons in here as the tool progresses. Let's turn off bounds. Next, we're going to go over the preview window and its navigation. But before we do that, I want to refresh this a little faster so we can see what we're doing. So go down to this end time here, which is this red bar, and let's pull this into like 250. So this will refresh a little faster. So now I'm going to go over navigation real quick. So in the viewport options, you can see that this is automatically set to orbit mode. Now, if you left mouse drag in the preview window, this will orbit your camera around your system. If you right mouse drag and click, this is going to dolly your camera. Now your middle mouse works both the same in the orbit mode and your other navigation mode. So if you middle mouse scroll, this will zoom your camera. And then if you middle mouse click, this is going to pan your camera around the system. Now go up to the viewport options and turn off orbit mode. Now this is going to change the way that you can navigate. Left mouse drag will tumble your camera around your system. Right mouse click and drag will rotate around the system. Now go up to the viewport options and hit orbit mode again. Now let's say you're working and you lose your focus. If you hit F, it will focus on your system. Kind of pushes you out there a little bit, but it's focused on it. And then if you hit your L and your left mouse button, that arrow is the light direction that is inside of the editor. So this will change that. So let's look at the rest of the viewport options. First one, if you click off real time, it'll bring up a button that says real time is off. And then you can see that this isn't refreshing even though the timeline is moving. Let's turn that back on. Showing stats will give you an error right now. It says to use your stat type in the console command. And show FPS isn't working at this time. If you want to change some of your camera settings, those are here in your field of view, your far view plane, and your screen percentage. And then I wasn't able to get anything to work with layouts, but I'm assuming that at some point we'll be able to change the layout of the system and then save it in the Windows under layouts. And we've already gone over orbit mode. Next button is called your viewpoint type. Right now it's set to perspective, which is your baseline. You can go to orthographic view. Let's say you've got a game that needs one of these, is set to one of these camera angles. Maybe let's go to left. Now you can see this is set to wireframe. We can change this to lit just for now. We'll go over wireframe in a little bit. And it'll give you all the different views that you might need. I'm going to bring this back to wireframe and then put this back to perspective. Next is your view mode. Now this gives you a lot more options for lighting that were in Cascade. Like you have your lit, your unlit, and brush wireframe, which were in Cascade. But you also have your shader complexity and some other quad overdraw things in here. And there are some overlap with what's in your default window, your level, excuse me. As you can see, you got some of this here. There's a handful of visualizers that aren't in here that wouldn't apply to Niagara. Go back to lit. And you also have some collisions and visibility collisions that you can use. Now you've got the show button. This will show you your grid. It'll turn on and off, which is right here, as well as some instruction counts and some particle counts, which is useful to have when you're building or to check when you're done building. Let's turn these back off. And you're probably wondering, is there any way to change what's in this preview window? If you go over to the preview scene section, you have a number of options for that. Now you have some lighting options if you want to change like how your lighting is working, and those are all right here. The thing I really wanted to show you was this environment dropdown. Now if you click off the show environment, you can see that you'll get a black window like you have in Cascade. The environment color isn't working right now. Show floor is good for if you want to have some kind of a collision. If you have any sort of collision on your particles, it'll show that there, as well as if you have lighting on your particles, so it'll reflect on that. And if you have any cube maps for your game, you can actually change them here. So let's say you wanted to change this to something else. If you click on this drop down, you can have as many cube maps as you have loaded in your project. So let's say it's a sunset. And you wanted to rotate the sky as well as the lighting. Now, if you click Use Skylight, you can see that this floor is actually reflecting what's in the skylight. Let's turn that off. And again, you can, whatever cube map is in here, you can use. So let's say you have a daylight. So let's bring this back to your Epic Quad Panorama CC-EV1. And I'm going to turn off the floor. And then let's say you have very specific post-process settings for your game. You can also change them here so that if you're building, it will reflect what's in your game itself. And that's really all I wanted to show in the preview settings. And the last thing I want to talk about in this video is the Parameters tab. Now we're going to be using parameters when we are building, so hopefully this will make a little more sense as we go, but right now I'm just going to show you the basics of it. Right now, what the Parameters tab is doing is keeping track of all of the parameters that you might have in your system and your emitters. So right now your system is using these parameters as well as these. If I click on the omnidirectional burst emitter, you can see that we have more parameters that are populated, as well as the emitter attributes and the particle attributes. And it'll keep tabs on what's being used when. So if I click on two of these emitters, then this will populate both of them, or just the system. Now, you can also hit a button here and you can add in attributes and parameters as you need. And here you can show advanced categories, which we will be doing at a later time. So that's all I wanted to show you in this video. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in part 2.